Shalom Aleichem, and it's chus to be able to be mishtatif in your Avedas HaKodesh, in your shlichus, each one of your places, Ishal Mekoivoi, Yovei B'Sholem, to be successful and to reach as many Yidden in your shlichus, to be ma'or them, etc. So the focus of today's shiur is about halachas of Purim, and in the current circumstance where many of us have got a situation of a lockdown to one degree or another, what things are okay, what's not okay, etc. So you're very welcome in the process of the shiur to communicate by the chat, and I'll be able to, between one parasha to parasha, to address the questions which are raised Shas Meiser. But meanwhile, I'm going to address the questions which came in advance, which I was able to prepare for as much as possible. Okay, so given the situation where some people are not going to be able to get to any shul, not going to be able to hear a proper kosher reading from Megillah, is there any value in them reading the Megillah from a chumash, etc.? So this is where we have a quote from Shulchan Aruch: "In ein Megillah ksheira, koydin oisa b'chumash b'lei bracha." In the absence of a valid Megillah, so then one should still read the Megillah from a printed version. You have the lower part of the page is the Mishnah Berurah, who's quoting Magen Avraham, who says that this, which it says you should read it b'chumash, it means a scroll. But if it's a printed chumash, for sure that you're not yotze. Then he quotes the Pri Megadim, who says no. The roy gambo zelikris beloy bracha shaloi tishtakach Torah's Megillah. So what we're dealing, that's what we're going to have to follow here. Like when it comes to Kriyas HaTorah, if you are stuck in a position where you do not have a Sefer Torah, so it is mentioned in Poskim to read the parasha from a chumash below bracha, with or without the brachas rishonos, etc. So similarly, in the absence of a kosher Megillah, so one should still read the Megillah from a text, and this is lezecher b'yalma. It is a lezecher shelo tishtakach Torah's Megillah. So now, I received a question from one of the European countries where there is quite a strong lockdown. About they wanted to send out to their mailing list a printer. So a month ago, they were planning to make a transliterated Megillah. That print a Megillah translated into Russian or whatever the language is over there, and everyone would read the Megillah, etc., and read it from a transliteration. I looked into it. I felt that wasn't appropriate. They're not yotze in any case. You're not yotze from a printed text. You're not yotze. And if it's for zecher b'alma, if it's lezecher, then better they should read it in the language which they understand. They will have much more of zecher than they will have from a transliterated text, which probably the vast majority of them are not able to understand what they're reading. So here in England, there is the London Besdin, which is not a Chabad institution at all. They've given a guidance to their communities under their jurisdiction that those who about doing a Zoom reading, etc., not the yotze, but again as zecher b'alma. And I can relate to that. I can relate that a Zoom Megillah reading, it's also a zecher b'alma. If I had the choice whether people should read from their own text in English, or they should how you should connect to a Zoom reading, which is a better zecher, that's a difficult question. And the concern which we have, obviously, is what's going to be the next in the future. Will this be setting a precedent for the future? And I have difficulty in deciding about that. It's an unknown. But meanwhile, what I can say is clearly that if there's no way they could get hold of a written Megillah and to follow it, let's say there could be some people, this is mamash for Yechidim, there may be a few Yechidim who would be able to follow a reading in shul, let's say, and they would have a kosher Megillah at home. So we're not Yotzer, or so we're perhaps jumping ahead. We take the position that you're not Yotzer Megillah over electronic media, because what happens is, as the Rebbe is very, very emphatic about this, that what happens is it's a human voice being changed into an electronic pulse. And at the other end, the electronic pulse produces a beautiful replica of the original human voice. But you're not hearing a human voice at all. So as far as we're concerned, no one's yotzer if they hear the Megillah over the telephone, etc. But let's say you have someone in your community who's shielding, very, very concerned, very anxious. If there's a way they could have a kosher Megillah with them, and they will listen to the Megillah over the Zoom, and they'll read it simultaneously from a kosher Megillah, well, that would be okay. In the contemporary Sforim, they talk about, you got this kid who's a balkoida, a budding balkoida. He wants to use they use the Walkman. Probably can buy them now in antique stores. He wants to put an earbud in his, in his ear, and he'll hear a reading of the Megillah and read it b'shas ma'aser. I can't say it's possible, but it wouldn't be recommended. So possibly I wouldn't recommend this style. There's a couple here in our community who are shielding, isolation, and mamish don't go out at all. So they asked, is it okay for him to read the Megillah, a kosher Megillah, without drop? So I said I wrote back to him that is okay. That is okay. But I recommended that his wife, Baruch Hashem, is with him, should follow in a printed text, a Hebrew text. And in case he makes a mistake, because sometimes the Megillah doesn't have any vowels, it's quite easy to make some mistakes there, especially if you're not a seasoned Baal Koder. So therefore, if his wife will follow in a printed Hebrew text, so if he slips up a little bit, so then she will be able to correct him. And this way, they're both going to be Yotzer. Because there are also Krieg Sivs in the Megillah, so it would be correct. It would be advisable for the non-seasoned Baal Koder to have someone there with a good, clear text to be able to check that they get it right. Okay, so having discussed about the electronic media being, as far as we're concerned, a non-starter, what about the trumpet? So there we are, you've got it in front of you. They call it megaphone, but I want to call it a trumpet for the simple reason that I normally think of a megaphone as one of those handheld things which have got a built-in electronic microphone, etc. And this is purely, I don't know what it is, mechanical. There's no batteries, there's no electricity, it's directing, it's serving to direct the sound waves. Instead of being spread all around, it's going to serve them to direct them in a particular direction. Possibly it's also the acoustics that's going to bounce off somehow. It does help, but it's far from a microphone. It would work. Some people are making drive-in Megillah reading, and in order to focus the sound in a particular direction, they're asking about using this. Now, I personally have not used this, so I can't tell you how it will pan out, because you're going to use this and you have a you have a Megillah you have to read from. It's not like you're standing there and cheering and say hooray. It's you have to read a Megillah. That means you're going to have the Megillah in front of you and the trumpet in front of you, and how you're going to manage that. But that's the practical side. I'm dealing now with the halakha side. Is there validity in hearing the Megillah through such a horn, through such a trumpet? Now, those who are closer to my age will remember one individual sitting by the Rebbe's Farbrengens on Shabbos, right just behind the Rebbe with a trumpet in his ear. He was ready getting on, and he was hard of hearing, and he had this trumpet to hear the Rebbe better. And he obviously had a sensitivity that between the sichos, when the Rebbe would turn around, he hid it. But whilst the Rebbe was facing forward and he was behind the Rebbe, he was able to hear better with the trumpet. So this kind of trumpet is discussed in the Sefer Shalos Tshuvas Halachos Ktanas, which was published first in Venezia, Tov Samach Ches. So that puts it back 350 years ago, approximately, when he lived. Shaila B'Yaakov Chagiz. Shaila, the question is, Chedesh Hamadaber V'Yein Shemeya, a person who is deaf, he is able to speak, but he cannot hear. But he's able to hear if he puts a trumpet in his ear. So the Yaakov Chagiz writes, the Halachos Ktanis, he writes, Dira Poshut Shechayiv b'Shofar. He is chayiv to hear shofar. He's talking about shofar. We'll come to Megillah in a moment. Because he's a bit of hard of hearing, he should be exempt from hearing shofar. When it says in Shulchan Aruch that a deaf person is exempt from shofar, that's talking about a person who's lost the whole faculty of hearing. But here he can hear. Not us. It's with a struggle. So the trumpet will boost his hearing. This is quite a creative comparison. If I pick up a lulav, not with my hand, but the lulav has got some kind of handle, and I pick up the handle and I've held the lulav. So the halacha is, it's called a valid lekicha. It's a valid taking the lekachtem lochem. So he's saying, hearing the shofar via the trumpet, he compares this to lekicha yedei davar acher, and therefore he says it's called shmiya. He is hearing, and he is therefore yotze mitzvah shofar, is chayiv b'shofar, etc. He refers to a Sefer Chaye Aryeh, which I did not manage to trace. I looked for it, and I didn't manage to trace it. So that's the Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz. Then we have, towards the bottom of the page, on the left side, we have a Sefer Sharei Deo. This is from a Talmud of the Tzemach Tzedek, who seems to have been a Rav in Frankfurt at some stage. The Sefer was reprinted by the Or L'Shem Institute within the last 20 years, I think. And he looks at the Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz, the Halachos Ktanis approach. He's not totally convinced with the theory of Lekicha Yedei Davar Acher, Shmo Shmiya, but he still does accept. And let's read his wording. Del inyo she'elosenu, nira yoysa de kol she'al kol ponim, nishma ha'koil when it is hearing the human voice, even though it's with the assistance of another medium, we will consider this extra assistance as being insignificant, as we find elsewhere the concept of Messiah ein beimamish. This is just one little snapshot from a long tshuva, but he basically does buy that hearing through an instrument which enhances the sound would be okay. Now, then we go to the top quote, which is a quote from the Minchas Elozah, from the Munkeh Cherov. And here the whole tshuva is about hearing things through a telephone. And this is where the Rebbe quotes this in Igris Kodesh, a letter to Rabbi Oriel Zimmer, about answering Omein. The background to the story was that in Tovshin Tes Vov or Tes Zayin, when there was the Rahman al-Islam, the massacre in Kfar Chabad, and they established a new institute called Yad HaChamisha. So at the stone setting, the cornerstone setting, Aven Apino, for this new Moisid, so they had an open air setting, and they had davening mincha, and someone davened at the Omid, and they used a microphone for that davening. Rebbe Oriel Zimmer was present at the time, and he was horrified with the fact that they used a microphone for mincha. And he wrote to the Rebbe. He had a special relationship with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe writes to him that it is okay. It's because there are tisha oinim. There are people who are nearby who can hear the human voice, and the people who are further afield are allowed to answer Omein, because they know that that is to be the raya from the Shul in Alexandria. And then there's a further letter where the Rebbe writes that in his first letter I'd said the Sfardim Machmidim Vashkenazim Mekilim, on Ungaran Mekel, on the Sfardim Machmir, and he's referring to Mishpatei Uziel, who has a problem with the Chazor Sashatz over a microphone, whereas the Ungaran, referring to the Binchas Elazar, he says it's okay. I'm not talking about Shabbos Chas v'Shalom. We're talking about whether you can answer Amen when you hear over a microphone. But here we have to be careful. The Minchas Elazar his understanding of a telephone was as if it were just a voice enhancer, like a booster. And therefore he felt that the telephone is okay. As he writes for Megillah, he feels that you can be Yotze Megillah through a telephone. And perhaps it makes the voice slightly different, but he says that that's okay. We certainly do not follow that as far as a telephone goes. But let's go one step back. The cone, the trumpet, which is just an enhancer. It's not a replica. It's just an enhancer. It's boosting the sound better. I feel confident that is valid for Kriyas HaMegillah. Let me just see if someone put in a question in the chat. Okay. All right. We'll come to that question later. We've got an agenda of 10 items. So this was the second item, which many of you asked in one way, some words one way or the other. So here, this is from the Sefer. I'm sorry about that. Let's go back. This is from the Sefer Piskei Tshuvos. I got this thing in the way. Let me just try to get it out of the way. Mikal nilmad she'ein lahatir lahafil kaletes tape hamukletes bo kriyas hamegillah. You shouldn't be using a pre-recorded Megillah for Balkoyer who doesn't know the Nikud. Pisuk Vatam Yikra Achareo. It says ve'osu lasis kain keshekoire lohoitzi yochid bebeisoi. To have a tape recording in the background. But then he says, if the Balkoire will use osniyot and Vakman, that's how you write Vakman in Walkman in contemporary Hebrew. Shirak hu shomea makeletus. So you got this, as I said before, he's got a Walkman and earbuds. So he says you can be yotze from him. And he can himself will also be yotze from that. But then he says, don't do it with tzibur because it's not respectful. And then, sorry about that. Let's come back again. In his footnotes, he writes, the hesitation is that the Balkoire may not hear himself. Now, what happens if a person reads and he's got earplugs? He can't hear himself. So he says it's still Yotze. And even he himself is Yotze. because there's Kriyas HaMegillah and Shmiyas HaMegillah. And he's done Kriyas HaMegillah even though he's not hearing. He says that he would be Yotze. But L'chatchila one, of course, one should hear what you're saying. And therefore, he says he's using a Walkman kind of thing. Okay. Turn down the volume. Sorry. Yeah, very appropriate. He should turn down the volume in a way that he should be able to hear his own voice, not only the voice of the one who he is listening to. All right, let me go to that those chats. All of a sudden, it's become busy. Let's go. Yes. So it's okay for the Megillah through the phone. I said very clearly, it's not okay. Zoom is not okay for the Megillah. It's not okay, and the phone is not okay for the Megillah. The cone, perhaps it sounds, cone and phone is rhyme, but it's a different word. So you're not Yotze Megillah through the phone. That's very clear. Through the telephone, yeah, telephone, whatever you want to call it. But if you hear the Megillah being projected through a cone, I feel that would be a valid Kriyas HaMegillah. Yes, someone is saying that's right. No microphone, that would not be okay. Right, going back to the Walkman, not to worry about that. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. People asked a question about shluchim. Moving on to shluchim. Could you do again, because people are isolating, the whole idea of having kids or adults knocking on doors, bringing shluchim is something which some people are very cautious of. So want to do shluchim. So could you offer a service to your community that we will deliver shluchim, we'll deliver a hamper. Hamper can be whatever size you decide, yeah? But I'll deliver a hamper to your loved ones, your friends in this community, and we'll do it on your behalf. Can you be Yotze? So that's certainly okay. And actually, here in the suburb of London called Edgware, they've been doing that for years. And that's really, in a way, been perhaps a big money saver. And money saver means a lot of other savers too, for many families. What they would circulate a week or two before Purim, a list of families in the community. And if you want to send shluchim as part of a collective shluchim, you'll tick off which families you want to send shluchim to. You put down, whether it's $1, $2, $3, whatever it may be per family, however you work out the costing. But then you would, then the Chabad organizers will prepare a hamper for each of those families, and it will have on a list. It will have with it a list. This is brought to you by the Fagelsons and by the whatever, and the Schneerers and the Smiths and the Goldbergs, etc. Exactly who gave it to them. That's important. It's important that the names should be there, because it's one of the inyonim of Mishloach Monos is the inyan of reus, of friendship. So when they receive their shluchim, and it has the names of the people who are thinking about them and wanted to send them, so then that's fulfilling the inyan of reus, and albeit through shliach, which is perfectly okay. The question was a little bit whether it has to be. There's the beautiful story in the Yerushalmi about were two chachomim, two amiroim. One was rich and one was poor. So the rich one sent to the poor one this measly, some very small thing for shluchim. He sent back a message. The recipient sent back a message. Kiyamt bonu matonis lev yoinim. What about shluchim? You sent me this. Yes, you fulfilled matonis lev yoinim. You sent me this little measly thing. But you want to see, then they goes and sends him a respectable shluchim. So the question here is, how much is it tongue in cheek and how much is actually al halacha? And in a sense, shlachmonos has to be kind of an expression of respect, and so there's a difference. What is counts as shlachmonos? But there's a difference when you give a shlachmonos to a child, and you give a shlachmonos to. Of course, there are tvoros to say you use with the kazayis and with shtei kazayis. I'm talking about lechatchila. So now, I still think that if one person receives a hamper, even though each person who contributed, what they gave $2, would perhaps in itself would not be necessarily lefich vaydai, but when collectively the person did receive a unit which was lefich vaydai, so and it is an expression of reyos, so I'm looking at those various factors together, and I think that it is okay, it's valid as a shlachmonos, even though each one is giving a small amount, but it has to be. I'm not talking about giving a pruta. Talking about a small, not a $10-20, but whatever it may be. Okay, let's take a look at those chats again. Someone's asking that something's covering the sides. It's what it is I'll try to isolate just one speaker. Right. I hope that's better. Thank you for clarifying. Loud halo bullhorn. Okay, good. Right. Practically, when we offer to our community that cannot come out to Megillah reading and they cannot read on their own, can we offer a Zoom? Or at least have them listen in while we are reading for others in person? You could do so, I think, but you'd have to make it very, very clear that no one is yotze from it. They shouldn't be, and as I said before, the alternative would be to distribute a printed Megillah in English or whatever language is their local language and offer them as another option. Some shluchim felt that as a zeicher, there may be more momentum if they're hearing on a Zoom than them reading from a text, which I can buy that. But I'm not going to pass a clear judgment on that. Someone's asking, can Mishloach Monos be distributed before Purim? It should be Boy B'Yom. It should be Boy B'Yom. That's a whole fascinating discussion. What is the mitzvah of Mashloach Monos? Is it an act of reyos, or is it to enhance the Sudas Purim? And so if you take the view that it's an act of reyos, an act of friendship, therefore that act has to be done on Purim. Therefore it is, if you don't have a chance to do it on Purim, then, but certainly you should be mishtadel to do it on Boy B'Yom, at least some of them. Someone's asking a new question, which is not negate to COVID at all. How significant does shlachmonos have to be? Can 2 flavors of chocolate be a shlachmonos? Good question. And thank you for blowing the myth that it has to be 2 brachas. There's no such thing. There's no such thing in halacha that the 2 monos have to be 2 separate brachas. But the Rambam, because where do I get that confidence? The Rambam says, "Ishtei monos basar," 2 portions of meat. There are those Meforshei HaRambam, Meforshei Poskim, who want to say perhaps a shtei monos basar means that they are different flavors. This is cooked and this is roasted. It's not necessarily not so evident in the Rambam. You can learn like that. Sometimes it becomes unclear. Sometimes foods you can say, oh, it's 2 servings. A bowl of potato salad. Is that 2 servings? Is it 5 servings? It's a bit schwach, yeah. But I think two chocolate bars would be counted as two separate monos, yes. And I think that would be okay. Since we're ready to talk about shlachmonos, also I saw about it's irrelevant. Negea bisman hazeh. 30 years ago, people didn't buy bottled water as such. At least most of us. Now it's become very popular. People buy bottles of water, big business. But I don't think a bottle of water would count as shlachmonos, because it's not like the bottles of water don't say this contains 11 servings or 5 servings. Water doesn't come in servings. You have as much as you need, but it doesn't. It's not servings as such. I don't think it's called monos. It also is not. It doesn't have chashivas, so no, it wouldn't count. Right. Shmulkovich is asking, is it better people to read the Megillah from a chumash than nothing? Absolutely. That's what we had, right? The first quote we had from the Mishnah Berurah, quoting from Megadim, that lezecher, yeah, it's lezecher. Tell them clearly this is not the mitzvah, but it's a zecher. But that the zecher is better than nothing. Absolutely. Right. Let's move on to the next items which we have, and people are asking about the Sudas Purim overflowing into Shabbos. Okay, so now let's take a look here. So we have a quote from Shulchan Aruch here. This is Siman Tov Reish Tzadik Aleph. If what is it? Sif Tes, is it? No, I'm perhaps mixing up. Sorry, Tov Reish Tzadik Hey Sif Aleph. So there are more is saying here clearly that whereas normally it's common to make the Suda after Mincha, before Ma'ariv, but he says, Kshachol Purim b'yem Shishi, when Purim was on a Friday, Yasu Hasuda b'shachris mishum kaved Shabbos. There's a preference. He's saying you should have your meal in the morning, so that you shouldn't impair your appetite for the Shabbos meal. Okay. That's lechatchila. But then many shluchim will tell you, and now this is obviously where COVID restrictions for some reason are not applicable, or that however you sort it, you want to invite people, and if you'll invite them for 11 o'clock in the morning, you won't have many people, but if you invite them for 5 o'clock or whatever, so then you'll have many more people who'll come for the Suda. And the men will come, they'll come, and you'll do a Kriyas Megillah if possible, and the men will put on tefillin, and then you'll have the Suda, and then you'll have the women will light candles, and then you continue, and then you make Payos Mapah Mekadosh, you make Kiddush, and then you'll have lots of L'chaim, and then Mitzvah Gereres Mitzvah, that they won't drive home after the meal. And if you're really very matzliach, that you'll have them plastered, that the next day also they won't be able to drive home. It's Mamash Mitzvah Gereres Mitzvah. So we want to look, many shluchim are asking for this inyan of Payos Mapah Mekadosh, and that's what I want to address over the next few minutes. The Payos Mapah Mekadosh. The idea of the Shabbos, of the Purim meal overflowing into Shabbos. So let's go on to the next slide and move that down. Let's move that. No. Let's move it back again. Sorry about that. Let's get that sheet back again. No, that's not what I want. How did I get that? Purim. Okay. Can the Olam see this this sheet which I've shared?
No.
No. Okay. So then, can you see it now?
No.
No. Okay. Let's close that. Bear with me a moment. Okay. Let's try. Where is it again? All right. I'm going to share this with you now. Share. Okay.
Yes.
Shkoyach. No.
Moet me.
Thank you. Kazak was wilt. Okay, where we were holding. There we are. Okay, I'm just trying to get this out the way. At home, I use. Right. There we are. Okay, ready? So now this is from Siman Reish Ayin Aleph in Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, talking about that whereas with other mitzvahs, if you started a Suda and then it came time for the mitzvah, you're not mechuyev to stop your meal. When it comes to Megillah, to Kiddush, you are mechuyev to stop your meal in middle and make Kiddush. It says, Ein lo yimahav siksadasi, legamri, levorach b'chas hamoza, and you don't have to stop totally. El yakadesh miyad, you'll say Kiddush, but you can be sadasi. Kadesh yeh Kiddush b'mkem suda shel acharov, because Kiddush has to be mokim suda. That's why you have to here stop in middle of the meal, because the Kiddush has to be mokim suda. So you can't just finish the meal and then make Kiddush afterwards. Kiddush has to be Kiddush mokim suda. So therefore you have to stop in middle of the meal. So therefore, let's say it's going to be Shkia, it's going to be 10 to 6. So your Dichtzilin is 5:30. Let's say Shkia is 10 to 6. At 10 to 6, you're going to stop the meal and you're going to stand up and make Kiddush. When you do that, so if you tells us, you'll spread a cloth over the table, primarily over the bread, obviously, over the challah, and although it's not so clear, but b'pashtus, it means you put out 2 challahs for lechem mishnah, and you'll make Kiddush, v'achakach yisireno, kadesh tisroe hapas ki'ilu huva ata lashulchan l'chvet Shabbos shehizkir b'Kiddush. By covering it and then uncovering it, so that means that these challahs are here at the table, so to speak, l'kavod Shabbos, which has been mentioned in Kiddush. Now, assuming that you have said already hagofen earlier in the meal, then you're going to have the curious situation of making Kiddush without saying Be'er Pri Hagofen. That's what he says in Sif Yud Aleph. You wouldn't say Be'er Pri Hagofen if you have already wine earlier in the meal. So, Eitzah Tova, if you are sensitive, that it's going to look odd for your people, that you're making Kiddush without Hagofen, don't drink wine before. Drink everything else, and don't drink wine, and then you'll be able to make Hagofen without any shayla. But if you did drink wine earlier, then you would miss out the Be'er Pri. You'll say Yom HaShishi, Savri Moronon, and you'd say the bracha of Asher Ketshon Mitzvah V'Rotze Banu. Why do I say you should say Savri Moronon? It's mentioned I think in a Yom also that Gam Kemshem Kachin Alapas, you also say Savri Moronon, and although I don't think it's written there, but somewhere else is written like Lahashlim Aminyan Atevis. Al Pikabola, there's 35 words in Yom HaShishi, there's 35 words in the bracha. We're not going to go into it's not 35 words in our nusach, but never mind. Meanwhile, you got 35 and 35 is 70 plus the 2 words of Savri Moronon, and that makes up Shem Ayin Beis, 72. So, all right. And the Alter Rebbe here in the Sifra earlier, later, he says that what happens with the Be'er Pri Hagofen? Of course, you made Be'er Pri Hagofen earlier. Let's say it's at 5 o'clock you made Be'er Pri Hagofen. Okay, so that's the Be'er Pri Hagofen, which is working for your Kiddush now. Right. Then he says further in that Sif, if you're making Kiddush on Challah, so then you would not make Hamoitzi, because you've already got Hamoitzi in operation from before. You'll hold the Challahs, and you'll say the bracha, but if you make Kiddush ala kos, then we're entering a problem. And that is that the Kiddush kind of creates a barrier, an interruption that the Hamoitzi from before becomes obsolete, and you're going to have to make a new Hamoitzi on the Lechem after Kiddush. Because during the time when you made Kiddush, you're not allowed to eat. You're not allowed to eat. Therefore, you'd have to make a second time Hamoitzi. That's the first opinion. The second opinion is that doesn't count. The fact that you are not able to eat bread whilst you're reciting Kiddush is not a reason to say it cuts off the previous Hamoitzi, because you were intended to eat further. Okay, you had a problem, you had an obstacle because you hadn't made Kiddush. You take away the obstacle, so you are resuming your meal. It's not a new meal. So there we have 2 opinions, whether you'd have to make a new... I'm in the middle of giving a shiur now, I'm sorry. Call me after 7. Our time. Bye. Right. Usofik brachas lohokil. Therefore, we have here a question: do you make hamotzi again or not? You're making Purim Mekadesh. Do you make hamotzi again? Sofik brachas lohokil, so you won't. You won't. You'll eat further without hamotzi. But bal nefesh yesh lizoeh shelo yilov v'ledekach. Bal nefesh should avoid this situation because it means, according to the first svara, your hemshech of eating chalas Friday night is going to be without a bracha. And therefore he says you should be mafsik the meal earlier and bench before. So this is the Shulchan Aruch, and we have here therefore a hesitation, an apprehension whether to be Moiperes Mapim Mekadesh. I'm not going to go now into the history of how the Rabbeim were or weren't Moiperes Mapim Mekadesh. Not now is the time for this. I have a simple eitzah. I think many shluchim may be able to use this. That if one of the members, either the shliach himself, or if he has an adult, a man, a son, or whatever, one of the Mekuravim, who will join them for the meal, but will have a Sudas Purim in the morning. So the Yotze Sudas Purim. Let's say I've got a son who's 15 years old. He's at home. He will have Sudas Purim at 11 o'clock in the morning. Could be, whether it's Fleishiks or whatever, doesn't matter. It's Nishnigeh. He'll be Yotze Sudas Purim at 11 o'clock in the morning. He then comes and joins everyone. But when it comes to the Sudas Purim, everyone washes. He will not wash. He'll have a piece of fish, etc. He won't wash. He'll come, whether he makes Kiddush or someone else makes Kiddush. Then, after the Zman at 6 o'clock, after Kiddush, Payas Mapalapas, then this one person who didn't wash now, because he already ate Sudas Purim in the morning, he'll now wash, and he'll make Hamoitzi and be Moitzi everyone. And therefore, this will be covering even for the Bal Nefesh. Because in this way, everyone is, according to the first opinion, there'll be Yotze from him. They say, Amen, be Yotze from him. According to the second opinion, they don't need to make a new bracha. But in this way, you've avoided this hesitation, if you want it to be covered, to cover this Habal Nefesh issue. So you can use that by having one Shliach Tzibur, so to speak, who won't be washing before Shkia. He'll be washing and making Motzi only afterwards and Motzi everyone. Right, let's go read some of these questions on the chat. Right. Right, so we've been talking about the Purim Mapim Mekadesh. Right, someone's asking, is seltzer or flavored water good for Mishlech Monos? I'd like to look into that again. Flavored water that should be okay. I think that seltzer is not okay. I seen that discussed. Happened to be just learning Gemara Eruvin and talking about Mayim and Melach. And Mayim and Melach is not good for Eruv Tchumin. And what is seltzer? So of course, it's salt and water. And so I don't see if the salt is bezunder and the water is bezunder, doesn't count.
He means flavored seltzer.
If it's flavored seltzer, he wrote seltzer or flavored. So seltzer, the flavored water I think would be okay, but seltzer alone, just the Alt Modish seltzer for the Lower East Side, I'm not so sure. Okay, someone's asking, can the meal be milchik? Is this Bichlal a question, or is it because the guy's eating in the morning and the evening? Aris from Kopias, I don't remember now. Okay. I'd like to look inside. Talking to Achrayas, I'm speaking to so many people. That's why it's important to have the questions in advance, be able to check everything up. I prefer to be embarrassed and say I don't know than to be embarrassed to say the wrong thing. Okay. What about Purim Mapim Mekadesh? Can you walk us through from beginning to end Purim Mapim Mekadesh? Where does Kabbalah Shabbos come in? Okay. So I think we've discussed the Purim Mapim Mekadesh exhaustively. The davening will come afterwards. Don't be mahader in your own l'chaim if you want to be able to do Kabbalah Shabbos afterwards, because you have to, if you're shechrusa, you won't be able to do Kabbalah Shabbos in any form or fashion. If you wanted to stop in the middle to pause to do Kabbalah Shabbos, you could do so. That's okay, but you don't need, not mechuyev to. Can you make Kiddush early? Shkia 6:30. Can we light candles? and make Kiddush. Yeah, I think you could make Kiddush. I think you can make Kiddush. I don't see why not. Back to the earlier topic about Megillah, when you have a minute, Shulchan Aruch does allow in a needed moment to read Megillah from the beginning of the month. Could that be applied these days, as we may not be able to get around to as many this year, or do we not do it at all? Again, sorry, I'm not going to answer that because I didn't look it up. I seem to remember that it's normally not done nowadays. It's so therefore I would, meanwhile, I'd say no. Okay, but we'll look up inside. We can certainly communicate about this later. And if you want to send me an email, my email address is Dayan, D-A-Y-A-N, and at, or in Hebrew strudel, lubavitchuk.com. So Dayan at lubavitchuk.com, and you're welcome to send me, and I'll try to answer you. Right, let's move on. Do you need to wash for Sudas Purim? Yes, you should be washing. To be Yotze Sudas Purim, lechatchila, you should be washing. Someone's asking, could you have geffen in Kiddush if you already drank wine, but someone in the crowd has yet to make hagofen? That's a very good question. Normally with birchas hanehenin, one would not make a birchas hanehenin for someone else if they are able to say a bracha. But if you assess there are people in the crowd who are not able to make hagofen, then you are able to say hagofen for them. I'll just take this a little bit further. Fascinating chiddush in Tofshin Chof Zayin, where Rosh Hashanah and therefore Shmini Atzeres, Yosef Hasteire, was Thursday and Friday going into Shabbos, and at the Rebbe's Farbrengen, there was a seder that someone would be making Kiddush as Poiras Mapa Mekadosh, and many people were Yotze. The Rebbe gave over that it should be announced that those people who were Yotze Kiddush through Poiras Mapa Mekadosh, when they come home, they can still make Kiddush for their Bnei Abayis. That's interesting because the Bnei Abayis in Crown Heights, most of them would be able to make Kiddush on their own, and still the Rebbe said that they can make Kiddush again. So certainly, if there are people who are not so capable in your community, assembled, not so capable of making a bracha confidently, so you could make a bracha for them. So, Rabbi Zirkin is asking, the one who will be saying the Hamoitzi have to stop eating before sunset? Absolutely. Of course, he will, if he's having nibbling stuff before, but he would have to stop before sunset. To say that actually, well, all right, I'm just thinking whether eating before is impairing his appetite for Sudas Shabbos. But then that's the same question for everyone. Why aren't we worried about everyone eating earlier and impairing their appetite for Sudas Shabbos? And what I'm just thinking of on the lines of that, I'm sure we'll get emails about this later, on the lines of that eating earlier and stopping, then you come to your meal, your appetite is impaired. But if you are in a setting of eating continually eating, then the appetite probably isn't impaired. Right. Rabbi Latovich, Yididenu from Melbourne, now of California, I believe. The maskona, what is best to do? Suda in the morning or afternoon if we're not going to host guests? Definitely the chatchila is to make the Suda in the morning. The only reason for making in the afternoon with hosting guests is because to host guests who would otherwise not come. Asking, is Krishma necessary before washing? That's a very good question. The Yochid who is stopping, who didn't wash before, so then he would have to give him another 2 minutes to say Krishma before he goes to Kiddush, etc., and washes. You're right, probably right. Okay, let's come back to our list of points here. if you are Paris Mapa Makadish, if you're doing that Seder, then what about Al Hanissim? Do you say Al Hanissim in benching? So the answer is yes. Although there are those who question this, here you have in front of you the Meiri. The Meiri is in Ksubis. He's talking about a chasana where it's a Zivuk Sheni, and therefore there's only one day of Sheva Brachas. And he says if he's allowing, halacha we don't follow this, but he's allowing that the Suda overflows from day into Nacht, or even starts by Nacht. And he says you can still do Sheva Brachas Besuda Rishoina. V'yaf onu, the third line, Yaf onu v'aviseinu noegim bepurim shchaliyas out of Shabbos. We start the Suda mibeit yom, ad she'yikadesh hayom, person mapa mekadshin, because Suda maskirin bo shel Purim. Mitam zeh. And in benching, you'll mention Al Hanissim. Sharei Av, Chamisha also Yoim, is Nesu. And Adin Noisin Laski Boshel Purim. Al Hanissim and Shusha and Purim is not such a need. It's also appropriate. So what the Meiri is saying, you have an overflow of Purim, and you have by this chasna of a Zibuk Sheni, you have an overflow of Simcha. That's why he mentioned the second line of Shloisha Yomim Shrach Simcha. So although the halacha for Sheva Brachas is only on the one day, but there is a allowance for a certain degree of overflow, which I'm saying we're not following that halacha over there. Coming back to Sudas Purim, there is an overflow of Purim to Shushan Purim, and on that basis, you would say Al Hanissim in benching, which the Suda started on Yom Yedalad and overflows into the eve of Yom Tesvav, you would say Al Hanissim. It becomes more complicated in the case where you have Yom Tov overflowing into Shabbos, where you're going to come to say Ritzei and Yala V'Yove, and after Lochas, the Ritzei is going to be, you're going to first talk about Shabbos, which is the evening, and then you're going to revert back to Yala V'Yove, B'Yom Chag HaShavuos Hazeh, which is the afternoon, and still we're noyeg to follow the Seder. The Frierdiker Rebbe was asked this, and if you want to read more about this, this is a plug for a sefer called Nesivim B'Sdei HaShlichus Volume Base, and there's a whole discussion about this situation of Peres Mapim Mekadesh, where you mention even Yala V'Yove after Ritzei, even though it's Shalei Ala Seder, not in the chronological order. Let's move on. Someone asked the question, this is a broader question. I could escape, I could close the escape. How do I escape his? Close this. Press 1F5. Stop sharing. Okay. A broader question, should we, this year, because of the restrictions of COVID, etc., should we prioritize and spend more effort on Shlachmonis than on Kriyas HaMegillah? It's a very broad question. I once heard that someone asked Rabbi Chadakov about prioritizing when it comes to chinuch, children, how do you prioritize? And Rabbi Chadakov's advice was, imagine you are driving an ambulance, and you've got in the ambulance, it's a war zone, and there's only so many people so many patients, you're going to have to make that decision. You're out in the field, you're going to have to make that decision who to prioritize and to take on your ambulance. So you do what you can, and it's very difficult to give a definitive answer. Should you say, forget it, Megillah, we'll leave it for next year. I don't think that would be when the Dafarai Chappen was Meken, each person in his matziv would have to make that decision, and hopefully you'll have the Siyata Dishmaya to come to the right hachlota, and whatever you're doing wonderful things. In any case, whichever you'll do, the Eibusha should give you hatzlacha. I just want to finish off with perhaps one last point. In the past, perhaps we've discussed about Tevilas Kalim, and people are, let's say, buying dishes to give out shlachmonis. Now, when Kedem put fish in jars, they don't toivel them before they deliver they put the fish in the jars, because it's called l'schoir, it's not chayav b'tefillah. And so there are those who take the similar position with the tefillas kelim for shlachmonas, that it's not yours. You bought it not for yourself, and therefore not chayav b'tefillah. We can sich dingen, but what I would say is that by din drabonon we say yesh breire. So if you're going to IKEA or wherever and buying a supply of glass dishes or metal dishes to deliver shlachmonas, what I would suggest is when you buy them, you say, I'm buying them, that each one for whom it's going to end up, I'm buying it now for them, especially if you're giving it to people who the likelihood is that they won't tovel their kelim in the mikveh. So then you buy it l'chatchila, that you buy it, whoever it reaches to their hand, it was bought for them, and then you can tovel it in the mikveh, and then you yotze, maybe that's a getovel to keli, and then you can give it without any hesitation. All right, I'll wish you all a inspiring Rosh Hashanah Leilonis, and we should all grow and give them Reb Nachas the Riker. Reb Nachas, and we soll sicher sein, Zenzach, Neshamas Begufim, Lamata Ma'asorat Fochim, Gesundheit und Freiligkeit mit Moshiach Tzidkenu.